In section 2.2, we're looking at adding real numbers. And of course, you've been adding numbers since you were very young, but in this case, we're going to be working quite a bit with some negatives. And we want to look at some properties that you've perhaps seen before. First of all, if we look at the commutative property, this tells us that we can change the order in which we add two numbers and we still get the same answer. So algebraically, we can represent this as a plus b is equivalent to or is equal to b plus a. And as an example, if you take 8 plus 5, that's the same thing as adding 5 plus 8. Notice we're only talking about addition here right now. The associative property says that we can change the manner of grouping three numbers and still get the same answer. So again, algebraically, we can group our a plus b in parentheses and then add c, or we can group the b plus c in parentheses and add a to that sum, and we get the same result. So another example here, numerically 2 plus 3, adding that will give us 5, plus 7 would give us 12. If we add the 3 plus 7 first, we get 10, but we still end up with an answer of 12 when we take 2 plus 10. The identity property, the sum of a number and 0 is that number. So 0 is the additive identity, and if we look at it algebraically, a plus 0 is simply equal to a, and of course you've seen examples like this before, I'm sure. Negative 4 plus 0 is simply negative 4. Now the inverse property might be a little bit newer, and that is that the sum of a number and its opposite is 0. So the opposite of a is its additive inverse. So algebraically, a plus the opposite of a is equal to 0. So as an example, 9 plus negative 9 is equal to 0. So we have some rules of addition. Some are easier than others. If we're adding two positives, just add. This is the type of thing you've been doing since you were quite young. Adding two negatives is very similar to that. We can temporarily ignore the negative sign when we're adding two negatives. Just add the absolute value, if you will, of each, and then remember at the end that it is going to be negative. So here, if you want, you could put in parentheses a negative outside, add the absolute value, in other words, temporarily ignore the sign. So when we add 4 plus 7, we get 11, but then we need to remember that's a negative 11. Okay, so 4 plus 7 is a positive 11, negative 4 plus negative 7 is negative 11. It's the same idea, but going the opposite direction. The part that tends to trip people up more is when you have sum of each. So adding a positive and a negative, we can subtract the number with the lesser absolute value from the number with the greater absolute value, and then we use the sign of the number that has the greater absolute value. So let's look at an example there. Here we have 4 plus negative 7. Okay, so if we look at the absolute value of both of those. Here we have an absolute value of 4. Here we have an absolute value of 7. So if we look at the difference of 7 and 4, we can do it like this if you want. If you look at the difference of 7 and 4, we get 3. Now look at the sign of these. 7 has the greater absolute value, and so we're going to end up with a negative answer. And we end up with negative 3. And some people like to come up with some sort of a story to try and remember how this works when you're adding a negative and a positive. So here's one scenario. You have a magical land called Integerville, and here the residents like to monitor the temperature of a special pool. And in their units of measurement, the pool is typically at 0 degrees. They can raise or lower the temperature of the pool by adding special cubes. These cubes are special because each of the hot cubes will raise the temperature exactly 1 degree. Each of the cold cubes will lower the temperature exactly 1 degree. So if someone adds 4 hot cubes, temperature goes up 4 degrees. And if someone adds 9 cold cubes, the temperature will go down 9 degrees. So what if one person adds 4 hot cubes, but then somebody else comes along and adds 9 cold cubes? Well, the net effect will be a drop in temperature of 5 degrees. 5 more cold cubes were added than hot cubes. So if you want to think of it, the 4 hot cubes that were added were canceled out by 4 of the 9 cold cubes. There were an excess of cold cubes, and so we end up with a colder temperature. So we could look at the hot cubes as representing a positive value, so positive 4, and then add negative 9 because the cold cubes represent a negative value, and we end up with negative 5. Another scenario here. Let's say you have teams that are engaged in a tug of war. So you have a yellow team and a green team. And the strange thing about this is that every member of each team is exactly equivalent. So it doesn't matter how big somebody is, how strong somebody is, how good their technique is, or anything like that. All it depends on in this tug of war is how many players you have on your team. So if each team has 7 players, then the teams are even and there's going to be a tie. So let's let yellow represent the negatives and the green will represent the positives. If you start with 4 members on the yellow team, that would be a negative 4, and then add 6 more members to the yellow team, negative 6, we have now 10 people on the yellow team, so negative 10. If you start with 4 members on the yellow team, like we did in the previous case, and then we take 6 members of the green team and put them on the other side, now we have a positive 6. The green team will be stronger by 2 people. We end up with a positive 2. In scenario 3, you can make up your own story so that you'll have some way to remember how this works when you're adding positives and negatives. So let's look at some examples. Use a number line to find the sum negative 4 plus 8. And so what we want to do here is set up a number line, and let's have 0 here, and 1, 2, 3, negative 4. So we're going to start at negative 4. And let's put a few lines in here. And then a positive 8 means we're going to the right 8 places. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 places, and we end up at this point, which is 1, 2, 3, 4. So therefore, negative 4 plus 8 is equal to 4. Notice that if you add a negative number, you go to the left instead of to the right. Find the sum, negative 3.2 plus negative 5.7. So here's a case where we're adding 2 negatives, and if you want, you can simply add the 2 values as if they were positives initially. So 3.2 plus 5.7, and we're going to end up with 8.9. But then remember that because these are 2 negatives, we're going to have a negative 8.9. That will be our answer. Find the sum, negative 10.2 plus 6.1. So here we take the absolute value of these 2 numbers and we can subtract if we want. So we'll look at 10.2 minus 6.1. So we're looking at the absolute value, ignoring the signs for now. So we have 2 minus 1 is 1, bring our decimal down, 10 minus 6 is 4. Then we look at which number is further away from 0. The negative 10.2 is further away from 0, so our answer is negative 4.1. Okay, the table shows the annual profits for 2 advertising firms. Which company had the greater total profit over the period? So a negative value means they lost money. A positive value means they made money. So we want to look at the net gain or loss over the 3 years. Now one thing you could do is, I see that both of these are positive values. We could add those first and then add our negative 6.2 to that sum. So if we take 5.9 and add it to 10.1, we get, that's a 0, and we'll end up with 16.0. So now we take negative 6.2 plus 16.0. So another way we can do that is take 16.0 and subtract 6.2. So that's going to be an 8. That will become a 5. That was a 10. And then that's 9. Bring our decimal down. So we get a 9.8. And because the 16 is larger than 6.2 and the 16 was positive, our answer for how much they gained is 9.8, and that's $9.8 million. And then in this case, if we want to add the 2.4 plus 6.5, we get 8.9. But in that first year, they lost 2.3 million, so we're going to subtract 8.9 minus 2.3, and we end up with 6.6. And again, the 8.9 was positive. It's further from 0 than the negative 2.3, so our net result is a positive. So both companies made money, but Company A made $9.8 million and therefore made more money. So there you go. I hope that this goes well for you. And if you can think of a good story that will help you remember positives and negatives, please share it with a classmate. Good luck.